Hello, everyone, and thanks for tuning in. I'm Amanda Ziadeh with WashingtonExec, and today I'm joined by a member of government and industry to discuss the role of critical technologies in today's cybersecurity landscape. Our guests today are Cameron Chehreh, Vice President and General Manager of Public Sector for Intel, and Gloria Glaubman, Senior Cyber Advisor with the U.S. federal government. Thank you both so much for being here today.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Awesome. So I'd like to start by asking you both to briefly describe your top cybersecurity priorities in your respective roles. What are you focused on at the moment? Gloria.
So in my role as an advisor, I'd like to expand a bit on the response if I could and be a little bit more broad, because obviously cybersecurity is an essential topic for the federal government and private industry. The top three priorities that should be considered should start with establishing clear and adaptable frameworks that set the minimum cybersecurity standards. These frameworks should encourage or mandate compliance while allowing flexibility to adapt to evolving threats, resources, and risk posture. Second, engendering partnerships and fostering collaboration between government and private sector is extremely important because if you think about sharing critical threat intelligence, best practices, and even resources in some cases, it's really vital to supporting and buying down risk. The third priority that I would look at is funding and incentivizing cybersecurity practices. A lot of times you see companies, organizations, even federal government, they're interested in cybersecurity, but they haven't fully committed to it. So ensuring resources are allocated to support cybersecurity initiatives is critical to successful execution of any cyber plans that you put in place.
Awesome. Thank you. And Cameron.
I love how Gloria laid that out. The brilliance of the framework she laid out is the way it operationalizes an industry. So first, when you start talking about the policy and the frameworks, for me, that's about creating common vernacular, right? Common vernacular for us to communicate across the private sector and government to ensure that we're really tackling and focused on the key critical issues and common problem sets together. As you know, Amanda, and I know Gloria knows very well, being at the front line of this, bad actors only have to be right once. So in order for us to respond in critical situations, that common vernacular becomes really, really, really critical for us to go after the bad actors. What I love about the second piece is I am so passionate about public-private partnership. Our government deserves the best that we can offer as industry. When you think of what the government's mission is and the diversity of its mission, all the way from defense of the homeland to the Department of Defense and the things that we do abroad to keep peace around the world, these are just some extraordinary missions. So being able to operationalize technology through that partnership is really, really, really critical. Now, we have to do it in a compliant manner, right? The FAR regulations, I know a lot of people in industry have very mixed opinions about it, but for me, it gives us a great regulatory framework by which to engage. But then it's all about people, and it's about building trust and trusted relationships, leveraging the FAR to be able to do this in a compliant manner, but more importantly, protect our government. It's the most precious asset we have on top of our GDP. The third thing that's really fascinating about what Gloria said, which is the funding and the resources, I'm very concerned about cyber moving forward, especially staring down the face of artificial intelligence. Amanda, as you know, in the technology industry, and I know Gloria knows as well, we love to chase shiny new objects because there is a great opportunity, right? We're all based in capitalism. That's cool. But chasing the shiny opportunity, we also have to remember it builds upon itself in technology. So cyber always has to be your woven in core to everything that you do. And we also have to ensure that boardrooms, leadership, and other leaders of both industry and government remember when we talk about AI or cloud or whatever comes next with the conflection point of AI and robotics, it all has to be built on a highly assured platform for the automation so we can ensure the integrity of the operations.
Absolutely. Well, Cameron, actually, jumping off of that question, what are some of the top emerging cybersecurity threats and tactics that you find most pressing to your organization, and how are you and your team addressing them?
It's a really good question. The adversary never sleeps. And it's fascinating. We see attacks on a spectrum from very fundamental to the most sophisticated that a nation state could possibly afford. We're also seeing attacks going deeper into the technology stack than we've ever seen before. It's getting down to the silicon level. It's why hardware is starting to matter more again. When we started to open these conversations about cloud, the great thing that cloud providers did was abstracted the workload layer and the software layer to be able to let you focus on your mission of business. This was a great value proposition. What we find at Intel and with others is now the attacks are happening to hardware, they're happening to silicon. So for us, we're highly focused on creating assurance in the platform, exposing security capabilities through APIs and software interfaces to cyber warriors so that they can defend the entire surface, attack surface, down to the silicon itself. We're focused on homomorphic encryption because at the end of the day, all of these bad actors want access to data, and they want access to that information because we know that is the new currency it's the new oil almost in the world. So being able to protect data in a data stream, we have to start thinking about data in a stream. It's not a location or a destination. It's not at rest or in motion. We have to look at it in the continuum. So we're focusing on advancing cyber and advancing the encryption areas by really focusing across the entire spectrum of data management and lifecycle.
All right. And Gloria, same question, but from the government's perspective.
Sure. So, I have to admit, looking at this question and listening to Cameron, and I had two responses in mind. I think I came up with a third one now. So obviously the opportunistic, zero-day threats are of extreme concern. Those are hard to defend. And going back to a little bit about what you heard Cameron talking about in terms of down to the hardware, software, right? We really worry about those because those just, as we all know, are hard to defend. The second one I would call out is the APTs, or the advanced persistent threats, right? There are a number of our adversaries that are out there that are, under the header of APTs, and we're constantly, not just the government, but private industry as well, depending on what they do for a living, right? What technology that is of interest, if you will, to the APT. Those are really concerning threats because they're hard to defend with. And if they're really advanced, which most of them are, they get into your network if they find that vector. And it's hard to remove them once they're in because they're so advanced, and the sophistication of their activities is really difficult to defend. The third one, based on what I just heard, and actually, to be honest with you, what I've seen over the last couple of weeks, is the criminals for hire now working with the APTs, right? So you have the APTs who are sophisticated. Now you have the hacktivists who have some geopolitical point of view, and they match up with an APT who aligns to whatever it is that they care about. And now your adversary has gotten really bigger and a little bit more unhinged in terms of their ability to come after your network or whatever it is that they care about. And so really, these three things are a concern, not only, again, to the government, but to the industries that support the government, right, and to the industries that are, that are supporting critical and emerging technology and that are leading the way in terms of, whether it's chips, whether it's AI, they should be worried about the same things that the government entities are worried about.
Makes sense. So when we think of detection and prevention of these threats, how can AI or other advanced technologies similar to the ones you both have been mentioning, how can they be used to help detect and prevent these types of attacks? Gloria.
Sure. So, obviously AI and machine learning, they play crucial roles in modern cybersecurity. Depending on where you sit, it could be from an offensive point of view or defensive point of view. AI can analyze large volumes of data, and it can identify threats and patterns that you're trying to defend against. It can help automate anomaly detection. It can spot deviations from normal behavior in real time. So it can really automate and buy down the time it takes to respond to an event, again, if you're looking at it from a defense point of view. AI-based threat intelligence can also help prioritize vulnerabilities. So again, if you're working for an organization that really doesn't have the resources, using AI to triage the first event, if you will, kind of again help buy down the risk and your resource stack capability. Again, if you're in the area of not having enough individuals, as we know, cybersecurity professionals have a lot of opportunity across the globe to go anywhere and be anywhere and do anything. And sometimes we find ourselves in a position where we just don't have the capacity that we really are looking for. So if an organization is struggling with resources, AI can be used to buy down some of those concerns through automation.
Okay. Cameron, your thoughts?
Yeah, it's interesting what Gloria's just laid out as I've tried to pontificate. How do we get in advance of this conversation? If we look and explore where AI is headed, we're on a spectrum. And it's really on the light end of the spectrum, it's automation. On the other heavier side, it's automation, right? So we're going from augmented to automated, right? And this could include things like robotics and other special things, but there's this spectrum in between. And Gloria nailed it. You know, AI today is about complementing the human. You got to keep the human in the loop because there's got to be some level of decision making that occurs when I discover a threat, I discover some sort of anomaly, whatever the case may be. We apply AI to try and help protect the government all the way down to how we do manufacturing and design spec. Because if you think about it, adversaries are trying to insert themselves into companies like us all the time, doing it to the manufacturing and supply chain. It's one of the best places to insert, to Gloria's point, and then be patient. And you wait a few years, it ends up in a government system. So we look at defects, part per million, the spec and the design and the product actually look exactly the same to make sure that nothing is getting injected along the way in the process. And we take pride in the security we apply to the entire manufacturing and supply chain process to display a level of rigor that, although costs us money, it's the right thing to do because it's the right thing to do for customers, for the products, to make sure we're protecting and preserving our brand. So we apply AI all across that process to simply supplement the human so that we can aggregate the billions of data points we're getting in across that process. And with some level of assurance, I mean, everything comes with risk. Gloria will tell you we live in a world of risk management. It's what you're willing to accept. But at that point, it is really, burning that risk down, applying it very smartly. And although you can get to a completely autonomous state, don't trust the autonomy. You want to audit the logs. You want to take a look at how it's working, and you want to make sure it's working as prescribed. Even with AI, we hear a lot today, it still hallucinates, algorithms drift. So you just have to kind of be careful, right? You have to give it the care and feeding it's needed. But when applied for good, not with an adversary, and maintained and monitored appropriately, it becomes a very powerful multiplier of us and, cyber defenders, cyber warriors around the world to be able to deal with the explosion of cyber capacity that's out there now.
Yeah, and Cameron, actually, as you alluded to, we know that the journey to modernizing IT and adopting emerging technologies is a positive, but can also open the door to more risk and vulnerability. So, Gloria, as a senior cyber advisor in this field, can you share some best cyber hygiene practices that you find to be most effective as agencies modernize their IT?
Sure. I think the first one I'd start with, surprisingly, I would have had a different answer a couple of years ago, but I haven't been in this job a little while. The first thing I would recommend is education, because there are a lot of things that you can prevent in terms of cybersecurity if you just educate the workforce on just not clicking on suspicious emails, or obviously not sharing passwords. Don't put your password underneath your desk. There's just the basic education that really, again, can help an organization holistically. If you have an educated workforce, that really helps the defenders' jobs. There's some other areas that I think that I would recommend that are obviously more technical. Excuse me. One of them obviously is multi-factor authentication, right? So we had Executive Order 14028 come out, and it talks about zero trust architecture and all the different principles. And so some of the things that you'll hear me talk about support that. And so multi-factor authentication, Something that's not explicitly called out, though, in that executive order is encryption, encryption at rest, encryption in transit. It's very important. Another thing that I would recommend is cross-domain solutions. A number of networks are now interconnected, and it really is important to make sure you have cross-domain solutions between the networks. It could be software-based, it could be hardware-based, depending on the level of the network. Again, I'm speaking from a government point of view. So if you think classified, unclassified networks, some of the recommendations that I would put out there. Diversify your solution set. Don't get caught up in just one contractor or one solution. This also buys down your supply chain risk as well. As another recommendation, continuous monitoring, update your patching, set solutions. And the last thing I will add, because I want to give Cameron some time on this one as well, is context monitoring. And so this is the kind of monitoring that allows you to understand the signatures and know what your normal team of administrators, techies, whomever are doing on your network. And so if you have an administrator who works Monday through Friday, 9 to 5, and context monitoring allows you to notice that that administrator is logged on a Sunday morning at 2 a.m., that is a flag. So context monitoring is also very important to your solutions or your best hygiene practices as you build out or modernize your IT network.
Thanks for sharing. I know I'm sure we could talk about that particular question for a long time. So I appreciate the response, Gloria. Cameron, similarly, how do you and your team support government customers with cyber needs as they modernize, and what do you find to be best?
Yeah, I tell you, Gloria's answer is going to be really hard to top because that I thought was robust and just brilliant. Maybe a couple of things to fill in the seams because, it's always the seams that the adversary goes after. You see, Gloria and I are both agreeing very hard. They've only got to get it right once. So a couple of things. The first thing is modernize. I'm an advocate of modernization, not because I want to go spend the government's money. I'm a taxpayer. I want the government to run efficient, effective operations. But you learn from supporting the military, stationary targets are very easy to hit because they're stationary. And that doesn't just mean kinetic targets like buildings and cars. It means your systems and your data. If you have an architecture that's been around 20 or 30 years, and this happens in government sometimes because the missions are broad, they're deep, modernize, force the modernization to try and bring the architecture forward because there's some benefit that happens in that. I'm gonna take some advice from Gloria here. First of all, it's a continuous education. People are constantly being educated about the workload, which is the software, the application, understanding its relevance to the mission. So the mission isn't building supplemental ghost capability around the core app, which all with integration causes seams. So it's helping people keep relevant, stay current with mission relevance. And in some cases, if you just got to throw the application out, I am more than happy for the government to do that. I don't need a CFO business case to tell me if an app has gotten a useful life because there's no graceful way to age these things out, right? So you got to be a bit flexible. But modernize, modernize, modernize. Tech is getting better in certain areas. And I'm also a huge fan of massively simplify. As you modernize, simplify your deployment, simplifies your applications. Because Gloria's other point is extraordinarily important when you talk about educating an end user. The end user is the weakest link. So the easier I can make the end users access, even with multi-factor authentication. I mean, today, MFA is so easy. So, users don't have to write down PINs and passwords. They could use biometric. They could use their cell phone as a react, and acknowledge back. So make things really simple because once you get the users and you get the strength of the users using systems the way is intended, you get a better cyber posture. But it's all built on that modernization and bringing the users into that massive simplification because you're reducing your attack surface. And I'm with Gloria about data and encryption. I think for the longest time, people thought encryption was an option. I think it has to just be a standard at this point. Because again, all systems is a culmination of hardware and software to work data. And that's why I talked about data as a stream rather than a location, because then when we start to notice that, we notice how users are interacting with the data, creating that situational context that Gloria talked about. In the community, in the intelligence community, we call it situational awareness, and she is spot on. I could immediately spot an atypical or asymmetric action if I know what normal looks like. Right? So it's really very simple to do that. So I think focusing on your data and how people are accessing data and being able to modernize that is just it's a great way for us to start encapsulating security better around it, making it easier access for named users. So we think of zero trust, think I'm starting with nobody needs access to the data. When I hear John Smith needs access, cool. What's the role? What's he need access to? Why does he need access to it? And set the profile in that manner. And I think that's the journey we're all on together to go build a safer operational environment for government.
Yeah, and I think doing it together is key. Clearly, from both your responses, there are so many overlaps in areas in which you share the same perspective and insight. So, how can government industry continue to collaborate and work together to thwart these emerging cyber threats and protect the nation's critical networks? Gloria.
Thank you for that question, because probably the most important question we've discussed tonight. And I really see the cybersecurity initiative, if you will, as a team sport. And you really have to bring together the public-private partnerships to help each other out. So obviously, the obvious statement here is collaboration between government and industry is key in order to defend against all of these cyber threats that we're facing collectively. And if you look at the relationships we have today, we have government-led, we have mandatory, we have voluntary, we have industry-led, and these are all very effective ways for the government and private industry to work together. So if you look at what we've done with establishing standardized frameworks, which I spoke about earlier, if you look at NIST, they provide that not only to the government, but they also provide that to industry. If you look at CISA and what they do with their cybersecurity guidelines and their advisories, they provide that not only to the government, they provide that to industry. If you flip that on its head and you look at ISACs, where if you're familiar with critical infrastructure and let's take the water industry or maybe telecom industry, they have their own cohort, if you will, that provides information to each other. And sometimes the government will provide information to those ISACs, and sometimes the ISACs work internally to themselves. And it's a really good representation for, again, how the public sector can work with the private sector to build trust, to collaborate on certain initiatives. Sometimes you see tabletop exercise come out of these relationships, which is it's really important to kind of know where you're doing well and where you have gaps. And so setting up these kinds of environments where information sharing is promoted, you have cross-sector threat intelligence exchanges. These things enhance resilience across both government and private sectors.
And Cameron.
Gloria gave a great answer, Amanda. I think a couple of areas of pragmatic examples where we can possibly accelerate is in the framework adjacency. When I look at some of the great frameworks that NIST publishes for government, like 800-171 or 800-53 for risk authorizations, there's an opportunity for us to crosswalk those with things like SOC 1, SOC 2, and SOC 3 in the commercial world. And when commercial companies who want to provide services to the government have those pre-existing certifications, we should allow for the crosswalk. Because simply put, it's allowing the government to get access to technology and other companies, vendors, providers faster so that we can defend the mission faster. And that's really what it's all about. It's about us being able to operate. I learned this support in the military, but operating at the speed of mission relevance, right? What we might do today or what we might do in the next hour may not be relevant the hour after that. And so you really got to operate at the speed of mission relevance. And Gloria nailed it, between the information sharing, the ISACs, and this rich, robust environment she described. The key now that we have to add, the key ingredients is speed and velocity. And that's something that the commercial world does very, very well because we don't operate in the higher risk environment like the government does. So we can afford the government that luxury by anticipating certain needs, getting these certifications in the commercial world in advance, and letting the government subscribe to them as a service when they need it. So I think, complementing what she's talked about, covered with let's do this at the speed of mission relevance, I think it creates a powerful environment of public private sharing that ultimately can defend the government infrastructure. And that's what we're intending to do.
So wonderful. Well, thank you both so much for joining me on this and sharing your valuable insights on a topic I know that we hardly scratched the surface on. I know we could go so much deeper, but it's so important. So I appreciate your insights and for being here today.
Thank you so much.
Amanda.